Hi, and welcome to the third part of my series about advanced Hibernate features. Optional is one of the most discussed new features in Java 8. It's a container that clearly indicates that the contained object might be null. This is great when you implement an API that will be used by multiple developers. So why not use it in your domain model and show everyone potential null attributes? When you ask this question, most people will tell you that Hibernate doesn't support optional as the type of an entity attribute. That's right, but you can use it anyways. I show you how in one of the lectures of my advanced Hibernate online training. So let's have a look. Optional entity attributes and relationships are quite common. They use null to represent a missing value. That's fine from a persistence point of view, but it makes the domain model uncomfortable to use. You have to know that an attribute or a relationship is optional, and you have to learn it from the specification or a Java comment. That's error-prone and seems like an ideal scenario for Java 8 optional. Unfortunately, Hibernate doesn't allow you to use optional as an attribute type. And even if it would, you shouldn't use it. Optional doesn't implement serializable. That prevents your entity from implementing serializable, and you can transfer it to a client or store it in an HTTP session. But you probably still want to use optional in your domain model, so let's have a look how you can use it for optional entity attributes. As I said, you can't use optional as an attribute type. You therefore need to apply a little trick. The good thing about it is that you don't need Hibernate 5 to implement it. When you use field type access for your entity attributes, Hibernate will not use the getter and setter methods. This allows you to implement them in any way you like. You can, for example, implement a getPublishingDate method that takes the publishing date attribute and wraps it in an optional. Let's have a look at this in more detail. You can find the examples of this lecture in the Java 8 optional project. The publishing date is an attribute of the book entity. You can see it here. It's of type local date and annotated with a column annotation. Down here you can see the getPublishingDate method. I implemented it in the same way as I showed you on the slide. I take the publishing date attribute and wrap it in an optional. I used the getPublishingDate method in the testOptionalAttribute method in the testOptional class. As you can see here, I get the book entity with ID 1 from the database. This one has a publishing date that will be wrapped into an optional. I then use the isPresent method of the optional class to check that the optional contains a value and not a null reference. After that, I get the value from optional and use it to write a log message. In the next step, I get another book entity. This one doesn't have a publishing date, and I expect that the optional will contain a null reference. Let's run this test and see how Hibernate handles it. Here you can see the SQL query that gets the book with ID 1 from the database. The publishing date column is the third column in the select clause, and as you can see here, it contains a date value. That date is also part of the log message effective Java was published on the 8th of May 2008. Below that you can see the same SQL query again, but this time it selects the book with ID 2 and the database returns null as the publishing date. This gets wrapped into an optional and you don't need to worry about null pointer exceptions, at least if you call the isPresent method to check if the optional contains no null reference before you use it. As you've seen, Hibernate doesn't need to support optional as an attribute type. You can use the getter method to wrap the attribute in an optional to get the same result. This is just one of the things I show you in my advanced Hibernate online training. So if you're ready to join me and take the next step to become a true Hibernate expert, I'm going to open my next class in the advanced Hibernate online training in a few days. and I would love for you to join me. So this is how it works. Similar to an offline classroom training, I open up registration, enroll a new class, and then I have to close the registration so that I can support my new students as they work on the material. You can of course work on the material at your own pace, but I'm there for you if you have any questions. My next video is all about you learning more about Hibernate, and I have lots of information about the upcoming training. So watch out for that video. The registration will only be open for a few days.